This is BBC One. We pause now with the rest of the United Kingdom and Europe to reflect on the week's events in America. David Dimbleby is in London.
The by now sickeningly familiar pictures of a world obliterated, a scene of total devastation, of dust-covered rubble and twisted steel, the tomb of several thousand men, women, and children. Only 3 days ago they shared the noisy, vibrant life of this city, and then they were extinguished. The first reactions were shock and disbelief and rage. But today they're being mourned in the United States, across Europe, and here in Britain. There'll be services of remembrance, and at 11 o'clock, 3 minutes silence will be observed. At St. Paul's, which has so often been at the heart of the nation's celebrations as of its mourning, there'll be a service of remembrance with the American community, requested by the American ambassador and attended by, among others, many Americans who live here in London and people from city firms who had colleagues working in the two towers of the World Trade Center, many of them who have lost members of their families or friends or colleagues. The Prime Minister will be here, the representatives of many faiths, and leading the mourning, the Queen. She arrived back in London from Balmoral yesterday afternoon and went to Buckingham Palace and had an immediate meeting with the American ambassador to offer the country's condolences. And at Westminster, the House of Commons have broken their recess a month early for a special session. They heard a statement earlier this morning from the Prime Minister and a reply from the new leader of the opposition, and their business will be suspended for the 3-minute silence. As will life throughout the United Kingdom, in Edinburgh, where the castle standard is flying at half-mast. In Liverpool, the port which has a special significance for the United States, the Liver Building, where so many immigrants once set sail for a new life of hope and energy and enthusiasm across the Atlantic. In Belfast, at the City Hall, where a crowd has already gathered and where there must be a special understanding of the horrors that terrorism visits on the families it touches. In Cardiff, at the Cenotaph in Cathays Park, people already gathering there for the 3-minute silence at 11. And in offices and in schools throughout the country, the silence will also be observed. At Wyndham College in Norwich, one of thousands of schools which will be waiting to observe this silence. And all over Europe, at midday their time, the silence will be observed. Chris Patten on the left there at Brussels, where the idea of this tribute was agreed yesterday. And in St. Paul's Cathedral, the seats are already filled with many special guests from the city, many invited guests, but also members of the public who just queued up and came flooding in here half an hour ago when the doors opened. We're waiting for Big Ben to strike 11, as we remember all those killed in the terrorist attacks on Tuesday, among them thousands of American citizens and hundreds of our own. In Grosvenor Square, a large crowd assembled round the statue of President Roosevelt, American citizens, expatriates, some of them visitors to Britain. And as Big Ben strikes, we remember the event 3 days ago, which brought a great city and country to its knees. Three minutes of silence. A small tribute, perhaps, to the grief of thousands of families whose lives were destroyed by the events of Tuesday, the 11th of September. A day, as President Roosevelt said of that attack on Pearl Harbor many years ago, a day which will live in infamy. Here inside St. Paul's Cathedral, there was a silence so profound you could hear no one cough, no one move, as the 3 minutes was marked. But this congregation here is preparing for a service which we'll be broadcasting 40 minutes from now. St. Paul's at the heart of the City of London, at the heart of the devastation of the Blitz in the Second World War. New York experienced what this City of London, or the city of Coventry, or Dresden in Germany experienced during that war, but all compressed like some vision of hell into one single day, a day of dread and terror and misery and panic, a day for courage and fortitude. When the news first broke, the world was aghast at these scenes, which seemed to mimic a disaster film, until gradually it dawned this was real, that thousands of people were trapped and crushed as those towers crashed to the ground. And we now know even more hideous detail from the stories that are coming through of friends and families of these people here in the Cathedral of St. Paul's today, who were able to talk to their wives or their children, or to send messages as they faced certain death.
Will be able to separate us.
In Belfast, a service taking place, and there are services throughout Europe and later today in the United States, where President Bush will be attending a service in Washington and then going for the first time since the tragedy to New York. And here in St. Paul's, the Archbishop of Canterbury will be speaking, the American ambassador will be reading a lesson, and a 17-year-old American girl will light a special candle. What we're remembering here today is a horror deliberately unleashed, a senseless horror to everybody except the people who unleashed it, and whose identity, of course, we still don't know. But we'll be back here at 10 to 12 on BBC One for the service of remembrance.